name when you ride the big airplane. Oh, they will call you, they'll be deportees.
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you that song. And the reason I wanted to share that song is because immigration issues are not new, as we all know. In 1948, a US Immigration Service plane carrying undocumented immigrants from California to Mexico crashed. All 32 people on board were killed. But while news accounts listed the names of the 4 people in the flight crew, the 28 undocumented immigrant victims were just listed as Mexican deportees. This upset folk musician Woody Guthrie and inspired him to write a poem. That poem became the legendary protest song, Deportee. So, like I said, immigration issues are not new. So while we go through this conversation, through this presentation, I invite you to keep in mind that things doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are power dynamics. There are forces that shape the narrative in our society. And also, there are collective engagement. There are collective responses that promote change. And our fields have always been in the front of those changes. So I am really excited about the opportunity to be here with you all and engage in this conversation. So and I would like to read the mission and the purpose of Women of Color, because it's so important for all us to remember that women of color work in and beyond the fields of domestic violence and sexual assault to address a broad range of violence affecting communities of color, such as human trafficking, police brutality, and over-incarceration. So, and we know that all the intersections that happen in between. So since the last election, immigrants with undocumented family members have been on high alert. And they are right to be nervous, because the president campaigned on the construction of a wall along the US-Mexico border and called for a deportation force. And just on January 25th, only days after taking office, there were 2 executive orders. One that authorized the construction of the wall, although it hasn't happened, and a second one that directed law enforcement agencies to deport all removable aliens. This second executive order is very important for us to explore, because even that mass deportation has long been an ineffective policy, it is continually used as a way to shift the blame over the undocumented, over the immigrants. So today, I would like to explore a little bit about the legal requirements we have to serve survivors, regardless of immigration status. And also to have a conversation about what are the limits on immigration and customs enforcement, ICE, and what are the protections we have, and what are the harboring laws, the risk that sometimes we need to know. And of course, what are our rights? And last but not least, how can we support our survivors? How can we support the most vulnerable among us? So let's start for the legal requirements. So as we know, VAWA and FIPSA prohibit discrimination based on national origin. And we are mandated to serve everyone without regarding immigration status. And it is also useful to remember that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 established that no person, it doesn't talk about citizens, it doesn't talk about other requirements, it just established no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Those are very important things to remember because things doesn't happen in a vacuum. And although we are living dark times, we are still a country of laws. And we know there are so many organizations that are in this moment supporting immigrant victims in the court. So as we know also, there is a clear obligation for us to maintain confidentiality. So here we have an ethical duty to protect survivor control over their personal information. And here we can ask ourselves, as staff in different agencies, are our policies and procedures written in a way that express our agency commitment to no discrimination? Does everyone in our agency have a clear understanding of the law and commitment and obligation to serve survivors without regard of immigration status? Those are really important questions to ask, because like I said before, we don't live in a vacuum and we are affected every day by the media, by all what we hear. So it is natural sometimes to doubt if we are doing something that is against the law or are we protected by the law. So VAWA and VOCA have protections for immigrants, have protections for undocumented survivors. And we need to know those things in a very clear way. And we need to be agents of change, wherever we are, to be part of that protection. So regarding the confidentiality, we know how important it is to keep all that information safe. More in these times where there are some times information that doesn't need to be in the archives, like questions about citizenship or questions about social security or other information that could be potentially risky for a survivor. So, and we are protected by VAWA about that. We really need to have written informed consent to disclose any personal information. And what is very important is that VAWA prohibits the Department of Homeland Security and others in the federal government from using information from a spouse or parent who has battered the individual as the basis for taking action against an undocumented immigrant. However, I have to say that we need to be vigilant because some of these protections are changing. And I will talk a little more in a moment. So we have the Department of Homeland Security, which is the umbrella organization. And then we have USCIS, who is the one that issues documents like green cards or temporary visas or etc. And we have the Immigration and Custom Enforcement, ICE, which, as we know, detains individuals within the borders. And we have the Custom and Border Patrol. So why is important for us to know about this? Well, I am sure that you have heard the news lately. And we know that a few months ago, DHS said that there were 1,000 families detained at the border. And last week, it was said that there are 3,000 children that are still separated from their parents. And in June, it was said that there were 2,000. So the reality is that we don't know exactly what is happening in this moment. There is so much going on and so fast. And that really make the urgency to get involved and learn as things are developing. Just a few weeks ago, couple weeks, there was a new executive order that provides the federal government will no longer exempt classes or categories of removable aliens from potential enforcement. This is also something that we need to have very present, because in the past, there were protections for some locations, for some categories. And as you can see in my outline, there was not the U visa or the T visa or other protections. And the reason is that everything is changing. A memo has been issued recently warning about some change. So in this moment, they said that they are prioritizing removal of anyone that have been convicted of any criminal offense, which is okay, right? Anyone that have been charged with any criminal offense that has not been resolved, which might not be okay because anyone could be charged, and that doesn't mean that it's true. anyone that have committed acts that constitute a chargeable criminal offense. So as you see, the horizon is just widening. Anyone that have engaged in fraud or willful misrepresentation in connection with any official matter, think social security card, think driver license, think so many other things. Also, now they prioritize removal of anyone that have abused. What that means, we don't know. Any program related to receipt of public benefits. So, and the last, which is really dangerous, anyone that in the judgment of an immigration officer otherwise pose a risk to public safety or national security. That, folks, can be anything. It is scary. Now, we have protections for our agencies. VAWA requires, so far, certification by ICE that confidentiality provisions have been complied when enforcement actions leading to a removal proceeding at a specific location, like shelters, like hospitals, like we know that sometimes that can be held, and sometimes we have to fight that in court. And like I said at the beginning, we still a country of laws. So we really need to connect with lawyers, we need to connect with organizations that are giving this fight in the court to support all this. So these are some exceptions to VAWA protections. ICE can disclose information about someone they pick up at the DV program or shelter to law enforcement, to national security officials, to immigration case judicial review. And they can do that for a legitimate law enforcement or national security purpose, and in a manner that protects confidentiality of such information. They can do that for public benefits purpose and for congressional oversight and data collection. And if the adult victim waives confidentiality protections. So for a long time, there were the sensitivity location memo, which provided guidance on when ICE needed supervisor approval prior to conducting enforcement at specific locations, like shelters, hospitals, schools, churches, public places, etc. So in the past, enforcement actions were not taken unless a supervisor had approved the action. This has changed a little bit, although so far shelters and crisis centers and family justice centers and supervised visitation center still protected. If anything would happen at any time, we need to know that these protected locations have not been changed yet legally. It is still protected places. So as I said before, we need to really be vigilant and connect with organizations in our localities that can help us to defend these rights. So community-based organizations and courthouses, if they are in connection with protection order cases, child case custody, or something related to domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, or stalking. So those still being protected. So sometimes I have heard that some organizations are concerned about harboring laws. If is a crime to help undocumented immigrants, or when it becomes a crime, where we have to remember a couple things. First, that VAWA and VOCA tell us that we need to serve everyone without regarding of immigration status. And the second is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 also protects us. So emergency services are not harboring. So emergency shelters, transitional housing are not harboring. These services are protected by the laws mentioned. So federal law authorized the provision of emergency services to undocumented immigrants. These make very difficult to prosecute any DV program or staff for harboring unless there is additional evidence of harboring. For example, if someone goes beyond providing emergency shelters and would advise an undocumented immigrant to do something illegal, then that would be harboring. But that is not the case of emergency shelter or transitional housing or our agencies in general. So emergency services are not harboring. So we all know that the DV counselor victim privilege exists. And we need to think about the DV counselor victim privilege as something that the survivor, the victim, owes. It is not the DV counselor privilege. It is the victim privilege. They are the holders of that privilege, and they are the only ones that can waive it. So if law enforcement would require information, then you can say, I can neither confirm nor deny that X has received services or is in our shelter. I can take a message, you know, something like that. So you can make your own way, your own strategies to keep the victim safe. Because without a judicial warrant, the officers may not enter the shelter. And those official documents need to be signed by a judge. Can't be just an administrative supervisor that sign. It has to come from the court. Now, there are exceptions. If the officer reasonable believes that the search is necessary to prevent immediate deadly or physical threat to someone's safety, or they are in a hot pursuit and imminent destruction of evidence, then they will be able to. Please give me a second to see the chat. Seems like there are some questions there. Oh,
Because so we're having some difficulty seeing your screen, Mercedes, and I don't want you to lose
thank you. Oh,
participants. So
thank you. Thank you for letting me know that. So give me a second.
the other option is I have your presentation
No,
open. I can
I
share.
know. Don't worry.
You know what's going on?
I know how to correct that.
Okay.
So
Okay. Excellent. Sorry to interrupt, but
I appreciate. I
everything you're
wish
talking
I would
about is
know
so
before
important, and
because
we're
I
just
know
figure out what it says.
is. Can you see it
Oh
clear
yes, it's
now? Yeah. I'm
perfect.
sorry that I didn't know that before because it's so easy to correct. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for all the information. So keep going. I'm sorry about that, but I'm glad it's fixed. All right.
Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
So where I was talking about the DV counselor victim privilege and saying that the victim survivor is the holder of the privilege. So even the names of residents are protected by privilege and only the victim can waive it. So if you are in doubt about that, contact an attorney because this is so important. It is one of those ethical things that we need to keep safe. So we were looking at the protections that the federal laws offer. And we know that FIPSA and VOCA and VAWA have protections. Now, here is the question for us. How does we make alive those policies in our agency? How are we being proactive in setting up policies and having those conversations internally? I was saying earlier that we don't live in a vacuum. So we are constantly receiving information from the media, left, right, center. We are all the time uh, receiving all this. So are we having those conversations in our organizations? Are we exploring implicit bias? Does we know how implicit bias affect our behaviors, our attitudes, how we show up with our um, clients? So be proactive. Be proactive not only in setting up policies and procedures, but also in having those conversations that sometimes are difficult to have. And remember that there are organizations like Women of Color and others that can help you to explore all those things that form the implicit bias that sometimes perpetuate some issues in our society. We all want to be agents of change. We all want to be helpful to our survivors. And also we have to remember that unconscious bias is there. I have it and each of us have it. So it is a constant exploration of, and review of how we show up, how we translate the inclusiveness in our organizations, how we welcome everyone in our organization. So I just want to touch really quick on sanctuary cities because there are not a lot of sanctuary cities or states in our nation, but there are a few. And there have been some information in the media about how sanctuary cities obstaculize the work of uh, the law, which is not accurate. Really, sanctuary cities only have state that they will not be part of this dark time. So they just move aside and let immigration officers do their job. They don't obstaculize, but they neither support what is done. And I live in California, and so it has been a big debate, and where we will see what happened about that, right? So supporting the survivor. Um, we have really, with all these laws that help us so far, we have a promise to protect and a pledge to heal. So we can do a lot of things to support the survivors that are immigrants or and undocumented. Because even the immigrants that are legally here, they are in danger in this moment. So know that ICE can't enter private homes. They only can ask for what they want. And if they don't have an official document signed by a judge, they can't enter. If you open the screen or a window, you are not granting access to the property. You can ask them to slide under the door any authorization they might have for you to review. And I want to emphasize the importance of language access. Many of the undocumented or documented immigrants have limited English proficiency. So for those of you that have a second language, you know what happens in the brain when you are experiencing trauma and when you are living difficult situations. Is even if you are proficient in two languages, during difficult times, you go back to your first language because the emotions interfere with all what is happening, you know, left brain, right brain. So ensuring that there are interpreters or translators is really important. Um, Sometimes immigration officers volunteer to be the interpreters. Please don't accept that. That is the worst thing we could do. But there are so many ways. I would say, I would like to offer a few suggestions, like look in your community, what are the languages that are spoken by your communities? Invite people to be part of a bank of language. Volunteer, so you can call somebody when it's needed. Uh, Train them about how to interpret, because not everybody that speak 2 or 3 or 4 languages is necessary an interpreter. There are some skills that are needed. So train them, and a bank language is something that could be very useful. So touching again that you and your clients can invoke the right to remain silent, and you, but you must say that. You have to invoke the right. It's not just being silent, but you have to state that. And advise your clients to not sign anything from ICE without talking to an attorney. And if agents come to the shelter or to the agency, take note of batch numbers, uh, name of agents, etc. Be proactive. there are so many resources online that you can go. I can send you this, or I can copy to the chat. Oh, and excuse me, somebody is asking if there is a way we have a copy or image of how the official document from ICE looks. Yes, I will show it in a moment. So safety planning, there are so many things that are important. We never know when something is gonna happen, right? So work with your families to make a plan. Advise them to have in a box, in a suitcase, in some place safe, all the documents they need. All their documents, their children's documents, emergency contacts, medical information, bank accounts, car titles, etc. That is really a proactive way to be prepared. Maybe they will never need it, but if they need, it will be there. And the most important thing, advise them, do not carry false documents. If they have a valid license, a work permit, or a green card, that is important, but no any other document. And as you know, there are some red cards that also can be useful. And I will put all these links in the chat for you to have. And this is an amazing suggestion. If someone is detained, write this number on their arm. It's the National Lawyer Legal Support Hotline. That is gonna be super important. And here are some immigration resources. And I am going to stop here so I can show the document I was asked to show. And Virginia,
You want me to unmute people so they may
yes,
ask questions?
Yes, please do that. And I am going to look for the document that somebody asked for.
Okay. Well, we have about 12 minutes for questions. I'm going to, everyone is unmuted right now. And if you all have any questions, verbally want to ask Mercedes a question, this is your time.
Like, I need to go there. And Katrina's like, no, you stay here.
Virginia,
Yes.
I have a question. Can we send the file to everyone so they can see the difference between a court order?
So I don't know, but I mean, I know that Katrina's frustrated with all the family.
Of course, I can send it.
Her family.
There's interruption in the conversation. Somebody to be muted because they're not participating in
There's
the
too much background.
Yeah, you might need to let people unmute themselves.
Okay, so
well,
let me
Tell me about it.
Okay.
So everyone is muted again, but you do have the availability to
share that with Katrina.
Unmute yourself. So scroll over the Zoom application and find the microphone on the bottom left of your screen, and you can unmute yourself and ask questions, or you can type them here in the chat. Please, if anyone has a question or a comment for Mercedes, this is the time to do it.
I also want to say that if you click on participants and you will see raise hand. So you can click on raise hand and Virginia can unmute you. But I am looking in this moment for the document I was asked.
It can also be shared at a later time, Mercedes, if you don't find it right now.
Okay, so I will be happy to send it to you, Virginia, for you to send to
Absolutely.
everyone.
Yeah,
Is that okay,
I
everyone?
think that's better.
Okay, so I have 2 minutes, and so what I would like to do to close this, because I understand we are going to have a couple minutes break before the next presentation with Gabby, right?
Yes, we're going to
Okay.
have a break, and I'm going to we're going to have a 5-minute break, and then Gabby will be sharing her presentation to us.
Okay, so I would like to end with this. It's a little poem, and the reason I would like to end with this, because as I said several times during my presentation, is that we don't live in a vacuum, and there are forces, and there are power dynamics, and there are cultural narratives, and we are a big part of transformation in our society. So I would like to share with you something. It's an old kind of poem that Marcos, I don't know if you ever heard about Comandante Marcos in Mexico. A few years ago, there was a protest by the Zapatistas in Mexico. And Comandante Marcos was a relevant figure, a leader, and he was being recognized as a social justice leader. So the mainstream media tried to shut him down, and they start putting homophobic ads in the paper against him. And this is what Marcos replied. He said, yes, Marcos is gay. Marcos is gay in San Francisco, Black in South Africa, an Asian in Europe, a Chicano in San Isidro, an anarchist in Spain, a Palestinian in Israel, a Mayan Indian in the streets of San Cristobal, a Jew in Germany, a Gypsy in Poland, a Mohawk in Quebec, a pacifist in Bosnia, a single woman on the metro at 10 p.m., a peasant without land, a gang member in the slums, an unemployed worker, an unhappy student, and of course, a Zapatista in the mountains. Marcos is all the exploited, marginalized, oppressed minorities, resisting and saying enough. He is every minority who is now beginning to speak, and every majority that must shut up and listen. He is every untolerated group searching for a way to speak everything that makes power and the good conscience of those in power uncomfortable. This is Marcos. We are Marcos. Thank you, everyone. It has been a pleasure being here with you today.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. That was amazing. Lots of information to share, and that you shared, and that we can look at after this. But you made it work. You got through the entire presentation, and you were so inspiring, and We are really, really grateful for you.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Sumaya, and thank you, everyone.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
right now we're going to take a 5-minute break. Actually, I'm going to share the announcement for the National Call to Action Conference, Summit and Conference that Sumaya mentioned a minute ago. So that's what you will see on the screen while everyone is, we can stretch up or go to the bathroom or do whatever we need in this next few minutes. Yes, ma'am.